Hello and welcome to Bringing Education Home. I'm Herb.
And I'm Christina. Together we are sharing ideas that we believe help families grow stronger, healthier, and that are both inside
and outside the box. If you like the show, be sure to follow Christina on Facebook.
And please give us a review and a like on your favorite podcast platform.
Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Nichole Stanford. Nichole is a Ph.D., is an assistant professor of English at the University of Louisiana Lafayette, specializing in pedagogy. Pedagogy. I said that right? Pedagogy. Language, prejudice, and power theory. She is the director of the University of Louisiana Writing Lab and has been training teachers since 2007. Her book, Good God, But You Smart, Language, Prejudice, and Upwardly Mobile Cajuns explains the role English classes play in politically controlling national outcomes. Her upcoming book, Teaching Kids Healthy Dissent, focuses on creating new practices in homes and schools to teach critical thinking, problem solving, and healthy dissent. And this is crucial now more than ever as our nation's institutions are crumbling, and this generation of children will be responsible for rebuilding them when they are adults. This is a beautiful conversation just in your bio. There's so much there to go on, and it's so heartfelt for what we are. So welcome, Nichole. Thank you so much for being here. It is a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's really good to see y'all. It's really good to talk with you.
Yeah. And then, we got to have a little bit of a pre-conference. And as we were learning more about Nichole and what her second book is talking about, how we help our children in our homes and our schools, it was really great synergy between vibrant family education and what Nichole is talking about. So today we're really looking forward to looking at that conversation. How do we grow these successful children, right? These successful kids who have a great way of problem solving and figuring things out. And like you said, maybe kind of standing up for things that aren't quite going the right way and fixing it in the future.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, I was definitely enjoyed that conversation, and I'm waiting to see what we're going to talk about today.
So first off, during our conversation, you pulled your children out of homeschool and started homeschooling at a regular school and started homeschooling them. So that is what we are trying to help parents do. Why did you do that, and how important is that you think more parents start doing that now?
So one daughter had enrolled in school at that point, and she said, school's okay, but I just don't like that we have to sit in the desks all day. And I was like, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's also backpack injury, school shootings, the way classrooms are taught above their level, the student's level, or below, the way children are segregated according to age, instead of being able to learn from the ones who are older and also develop their own teaching skills by pulling in the ones who are younger and tutoring them. So many things are, I had issues with so many parts of the education that when she just said, I don't like sitting in the desk all day, I was like, all right, well, we're done with that. We're done with that experiment. And I say that because already I had gone in having gotten a PhD and studied the education system and how mostly it exists to reify, to strengthen the status quo, not to teach critical thinking, not to teach healthy citizen practices where we're really considering, how we want to be ruled, but it's more about sorting people into the correct jobs and classes and stuff and by class, I mean socioeconomic class, So then I had two more kids behind her, and we just kept going with the homeschooling, and I chose an unschooling structure because I wanted, where my studies had taken me had shown me, so I studied pedagogy, so I'm always looking at what are the best teaching practices, what are the best learning practices, how are brains firing most optimally to learn. And I will say one of the most, one of the principles with the biggest impact is figure out where your kids are asking questions, because that indicates where their neurons are developing. And that tells you where they can learn most readily. And if you suppress those questions and say, don't ask that now, right now you need to focus on asking these questions and learning for, the material for this test, they can do it, but it's really not optimal. So one of the core principles for unschooling that I chose, and the co-op that I created with a few families in my community, was that we were going to be curiosity based. So we really watch our kids closely to see what are they curious about, and we pursue activities related to that, like ways to help them specialize and develop and learn everything they can, answer all their questions. So yeah, we did unschooling, and there are a couple other core principles there, but let me stop and see if I'm answering if I'm on track.
Oh, you are
We're
completely
so
on track. So much of what you talked about that you learned and you implemented, we have over the years of her being a teacher and me just being out in the world and the out of the box thinker. We've come across so much of what you're doing, and this is what we teach our parents naturally. We've just come through it naturally, as this is how things should be. And so that you put so much study and emphasis of your life into this, that shows that we're doing it right. And also, we don't call what we do homeschooling, because homeschooling is also broken. And but unschooling was more of a verb to us. So it's like, well, we need to unschool the kids before we teach them education at home, which is what we call ours. We call it bringing education home, or education at home, because it has very little to do with school and so much more to do with figuring out how your children learn, teaching them to learn, teaching them to be good people and citizens, and then using what they're interested in to build the foundation of their education. So if they're interested in music, it's like, you can teach them math in music, you can teach them English in music, you can teach them music in music. So you could build your whole education system just around your child's interest in music, or even in sports. So there's so much math in sports, even if they're like interested in sports, but in clothes, you could like uniform designs and the reason they fit and change. So whatever your children are interested in is like, you can get so much more of an education once they get interested and excited about it, and then they love learning. And so that's kind of the basis of ours, and that's why we call it bringing education home instead of homeschooling.
I love that. And I think the words matter, the words that you choose to use. Excuse me. One of the big things we did through, pursuing almost probably a very similar structure to what you're talking about, was my daughter, Emma, was very into collecting rocks from an early age. And then she moved into pretty rocks. So she liked crystals. So I kept, the question we always ask in the co-op is, because we know that kids' interests have been shown in studies to not change over time. Instead of saying, well, good, enjoy that, now let's learn about some other things. Instead, just go, okay, go deeper. How can you professionalize with that? How could you make a career out of something that you love? So she started, she was really into pretty rocks and crystals and, things like that. So I said, okay, so we got involved in a rock hound society locally, a rock collector society. They loved her interests, so they donated so many cool geodes and stuff to us. And we, every time we planned a vacation, we would go somewhere where there was a crystal mine nearby. So we went to Arkansas and we mined our own quartz crystals and learned about, the process of extracting them from the earth and how it can hurt the ecosystem whenever you're mining in that kind of way. And then she stayed with it and started going in the direction of pretty things, frou-frou. So I said, okay, I bought her a basic kit for making earrings and jewelry, bracelets and stuff out of crystals. And she did it, and we earned enough money. We sold it to friends and on Facebook. And she earned enough money for us to buy more products. So we reinvested, and then soon we were selling at markets. And then she was learning. So she memorized all the different kinds of rocks, and was it a tetrahedron structure? Was it octagonal? What was the growth pattern of these different crystals and the formation? Where were they found? What were the ethical practices involved in extracting these crystals? And, you know, choosing the metals we would wrap them in to make earrings. And then she was in charge of doing the math. So we made the price of every piece of jewelry $11 or some multiple of 11 so that she could do the math in her head.
Very.
So she was doing, and I should mention, she was probably 8. She was about 8 years old when we were doing this. And she was in charge of the customer service. She would stand at the booth and she would say, "Welcome to our table. I can answer questions about this. And if you have any other questions, you can ask my mom." So she was
8 years old, being able to do all of that, have those experiences. And, you know, just thinking about how an 8-year-old with those kinds of experiences is being set up for their future life, right? You know, she might not be in jewelry and crystals later in life, but the business experience and the research experience and everything that she has had. Think about if we have more children set up like this to help our world as they grow older, right? I mean, oh,
And
wow.
how many 8-year-olds are comfortable enough standing at the front of a booth, talking to strangers coming up to them and being a salesperson? I mean, that alone is incredible, because right now our children are so be quiet, stay out of the sight, just, you know,
Or they hide because, oh, I'm
where
scared.
we were, children are meant to be heard or seen and not heard kind of stuff. And instead it's like this new, bringing the children out to the front just gives them so much more security and confidence.
Yeah. And that wasn't something that came naturally to her. That was something that she had. I said, if we are going to sell this, this is your project, not mine. So you're going to have to be the one standing out there. So she committed to it. She worked up the courage and she did it. And it got to a point where she wasn't interested in it anymore. And I knew, because of neuroplasticity, a lot of these categories are going to be replaced. Her brain's going to discard a lot of this information. She's going to learn others. But the core system of being able to create a business, figure out how to, you know, I really love Howard Gardner's definitions of education. He's got the multiple intelligences. And I don't know if you've ever heard, he also has this like 3-prong approach that he looked at for measuring whether people are smart or not. And it's like, can you educate yourself? Can you find the resources you need? Can you problem solve? And can you be contextually aware and contribute to your society based on the needs that you notice around you? And, you know, the habits and the customs around you, can you adapt? So measuring in that way, as an educator, I'm always looking at my classes that way. So looking at her, I was like, even if she forgets the name of every one of these rocks or you know, those things, I feel great knowing that when she gets to a point later in life and she realizes she needs to make a little more business for herself.
Yeah, exactly. That is, yeah. All of that is just exactly what we want. We want these children that are able to learn. And not all that, and you lit up, I saw you, and hopefully when we get the video up, people will see this as well. But Nichole's eyes lit up when Herb said love of learning. Is like, yes, that's one of those big things, because if the children have that love of learning, they're going to keep going because they just want to keep learning more.
Yeah. So the kids that fit into our current education system that love learning, that love being at school and love doing all of that, they usually end up becoming teachers, because that really is the path that the schools are designed. The schools are pretty much designed, if you like that environment, that's kind of where you end up. So it's like the best students in school end up becoming teachers because that environment fits them. But so many people of the other children aren't necessarily interested in that. And again, it is this kind of sorting thing, but it used to be a sorting thing because they had the different kind of classes. They had like the woodshop classes, they had the mechanic classes, they had and all of that's gone away. And so many kids are now forced into a box without any other sort of outlet in school. And that takes so from an empath point of view, so many people push together who don't like where they are, don't like what they're doing. That creates conflicts within them that then spill out into the other kids. So as a kid, it's like I was highly sensitive. I would what people call an empath. So in school, so many people didn't like being there, and I felt that. And so I always felt that people didn't like me. So, but it was, they weren't liking themselves. They hated where they were. And so I internalized all of those feelings as they didn't like me, they hated me. And that that created lots of different traumatic events for me throughout my education system because of that. So, and again, and now what you're talking about and what we're trying to create is you get kids together who are actively working in cooperation towards a goal, towards their love, towards their learning. And again, that creates more confident children with way less trauma
and more joy and all of that.
Yeah. And I like ending on the joy note, but I'm going to go a little into that dark side again, you know, the kind of an extended trauma of being in classrooms. Bessel van der Kolk writes a little about this in The Body Keeps the Score, which is an amazing book. He's one of the people who fought to get PTSD as a diagnosis. He says the conditions of the classroom sort of force children to go into a collapse or a freeze state. You know, you got fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And and you end up learning to dissociate from yourself. And I think that it really, over time, it's had its ups and downs. Classrooms, how well classrooms serve the people who are in them. But I would say that most people our age, you'll find that they have massive dissociation from their bodies. And I think it's because we were trained as children to sit ourselves in the desk and be proper, you know, and obey. But I don't know about you, my mind was always outside the window or in a book I was sneaking, you know, or in daydreams. And so we were trained 8 hours a day or more, you know, to dissociate from our physical surroundings.
Yeah, I went to a really little small school out in the middle of nowhere, and I'm very smart. And I would just sit in the back of the classroom and pick up a book. And I would just be reading my books through the class. And every once in a while, the teachers would try and pick on me and say, okay, well, Herb's not paying attention, and give the question. And I would like pop my head up, give the answer, give more than the answer, give context and everything, and then just go back to reading the book. And the teachers always left me alone. In some of my English classes in high school, it's like as the teachers were getting their reading lists up, they would actually go, Herb, have you read this book? Herb, have you read this book? Herb, have you read this book? And when they found books I haven't read, that was what they would use for their teaching materials, because most of the stuff they had already taught.
Now, when he says small school, we're talking a graduating class of 11. So this truly was a small school, right? So yeah, but still, it was just, you know, one of those things where he had to deal with constantly, where the teachers were trying to, and he was already ahead of, and you know, the back and forth.
So yeah, school wasn't necessarily great for me. It really was kind of a waste of time. Yeah. Because again, I would just sit in the back and read and listen and just absorb it all in such a weird way that my brain works, that it also made me kind of scary to everybody, which is, again, brings me back to some of the trauma that I kind of suffered because of the way my brain worked. And it was so we're trying to help other kids not have to go through that.
Yeah, exactly. And if nothing else, I just thought, why would I put my kids in that system where they're just going to be bored all day? What a waste of their childhoods, you know? And so that was like kind of the, you know, I was like balancing it out, and I was like, well, what if I don't achieve my goals? And I was like, well, compared to school, I'm not doing that bad, you know, like the kind of, and I'm sure Christina, you really know what I'm talking about because you were involved in the assessment, and you can see how many people are not reached in the classroom, how many people need extra help. And so I was like, if nothing else, and I'm telling you, like the little, you know, rationales I came up with for myself as I was going in, but I want to say it has not played out this way. As I've been schooling from home, or, you know, learning, my kids have been learning from home. It's been amazing. It's been wonderful. I love it. And I'm very pleased with it. But going in, I was like, at least I know I won't do more harm than a school would.
Yes. Yeah. And I guess that's one of the things that we're really trying to get the message out to parents is that, you know, if the child is not happy in school, if the child is not really flourishing and thriving, right? I mean, every day can't be a glorious rainbow day, right? But we can have mostly good days in school. And if your child isn't there, then at least take a look at it and see what else you can do to either help build around it or take them out and do something different for that child. Because, you know, we don't want our kids growing up trauma filled or dysregulated, or all those words that people use now. And it's like, well, where is that coming from? It's coming because their needs are not being fulfilled. They're not learning. They're not growing. They aren't happy.
Can you hear the trauma from a 27-year teacher who, when she started 27 years ago, she got to create her lesson plan. She got to figure out where the kids were and individualize the education. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the year, as the kids were leaving her school, she would be crying because it's like, oh, my kids are leaving and I'm not going to get to work with them the next year.
Yeah.
And then after 27 years, she would be crying at the start of the school year. It's like, I don't get to reach my kids. They don't let me work with them. I have to be on this page. I don't get to be a teacher. They're trying to make me teach stuff that's not true. Yeah. And so she went from, and one of the things you talked about is kids not changing. She used to teach her little brother when before school, she would tutor her little brother, and she wanted to be a school teacher since she was a way little kid.
8 years old.
8 years old. So she's always been a teacher. So the breaking of the school system for her, she took it incredibly personally and to heart because she was in it. And it's not the teachers. Well, some of them are the teachers. But the way the school system has let her down and taken away her joys from teaching children is another one of these reasons that we are starting this. And one other thing is there's a lot of parents who think, I don't have a PhD. I did terrible in school. I barely graduated from high school. I had a horrible time in school. Okay. Those are the parents who know that the school system is broken. They know, and your children are so much like you. So if you had that much trouble in school, you hated school that much, why are you putting your children through that? Because they're going to have pretty much the same kind of responses that you do, because that's who they see. That's who they grow up with. Those are the responses that they learn. So if you had a hard time in school, it's like, seriously, you know that it doesn't work. Get your kids out.
I know. I think about this a lot, and like all the things I struggled with in school, the things that make me feel, I still look at, where my weak spots are when it comes to teaching my kids. And I think about the things I struggled to learn, and I never fully mastered them, and I'm doing fine without thinking about trapezoids or Pythagorean theorem. I'm doing fine.
Yeah.
I never need it. What I need, most of what I need, I didn't learn in school. I had to learn, through higher education or through my personal studies. So that's been that's another thing I often tell parents when they're considering homeschooling or choosing some alternative. I'm like, the things that you feel ill-equipped to teach your kids, did you ever need them? Oh, okay. Well, are your kids going to need them? Oh, maybe not.
Right. And if they do need them, or you really want that taught, can you get a tutor, or can you get a coach, or can you do some kind of outreach to fill in that gap? I mean, there's choices. And especially now that we're in such a digital world, I mean, there are so many classes online. There are so many teachers that you can work with even at a distance now, right? And fill in those gaps and holes that you feel that you filled.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we use Celis, an online academy called Celis, and we supplement with some out-school classes sometimes, just, when we want to study something else.
Yeah.
So so a lot of parents also think that when you're educating your children at home, it needs to be 8-9 hours a day or 7 hours a day like it is in school. How much time do you think on average do you spend with your children in the learning process of the formalness of the education? Not because everything, once you do this, becomes a learning process, but in the formal kind of education,
seats in chairs or seats in a special room kind of thing.
How much day do you spend with stuff?
It just changed recently, actually. I went in having read a lot of studies about the dangers of academic. How would you say it? I know how to write it, but not how to say it. I'm an English major, so I know how to spell everything, but not pronounce everything. Academicize. It's to introduce academics too early. Have your kids learn through a curiosity-based way versus academic version. So if you introduce academics too early, or I'll say it this way, if you introduce it early, the outcome is the same as if you introduce it late, but the kids have higher anxiety if it was introduced early. So they have bad emotional patterns and dysregulation around the material. So I delayed that for a very long time. And it's only this year that I've actually begun an online program. Until then, the only formal education we had, and this may be shocking to some people, but I'll say it, was 2 hours a week, where I have a room here in my house with a chalk wall and chairs. And the way our co-op works is they spend a different day with each mom in the group. So on, Mondays, they do one thing, Tuesdays, they do another thing. And they were with me on Thursdays, and I would teach English and humanities, history, philosophy, stuff like that. We were just kind of making our way through world literature. Anyway, so that was only 2 hours a week. Mm-hmm. And recently, in every other class was hands-on. They were doing science experiments with one of the moms. Excuse me. So it wasn't maybe, you could say it was formal learning, but I would say maximum 2 hours a day.
Playtime.
Yeah. Now we've switched to, we do a little more of the online program. That's about 5 to 6 hours per week. But what I've found, and I'm a numbers person, so I did the numbers. And if you've read Outliers, it takes about, was it Outliers or one of the other Malcolm Gladwell books? It takes about 10,000 hours to become an expert in anything. So doing the math, what I saw was if kids gave 3 hours, I think it was 3 hours per day, committed 3 hours per day to something they were interested in, they could, and this excludes weekends and holidays, then kids can become, and that's only 3 hours per day. A lot of times kids dive in for way more, per day than that. They could become an expert 2 times over by the time they get to college. By the time they, turn 18 and they take a diploma or the equivalent, get the equivalent of a diploma and decide if they want to go to college or not. But they can become an expert 2 times over at only 3 hours per weekday. Yeah. So that was my goal. Have the kids give 3 hours per day to something they love. It doesn't have to be formal academics.
Yeah, that is amazing, because a lot of people are like trying to recreate a school classroom in a room in their house, or they're trying to have the kids do more sit down and things like that. And that's one of the things I keep telling them as we develop and talk with families. It's like, no, you sneak it in. You learn as you're doing regular life. Matter of fact, I was on a podcast yesterday and we were talking about summer slide. A lot of parents are worried about summer slide, how their kids go backwards in academics. And if you're educating at home, they don't really do that, because guess what? You're constantly learning. Like I said, you kind of sneak it in, right? You go to the kitchen and you start baking and cooking with them, right?
Yeah.
Tons of math.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the part is you double the recipe. Now they're having to double all of those things, and they're thinking about how that all goes together. And mm-hmm. So you have fun with your children and they learn through that process.
Exactly. My sons learn their fractions with their Lego pieces.
Yeah.
Half and quarters.
Yep.
And if you think your kids can't focus on something for a long period of time, it's because they're not interested. You put them in front of a video game, they can sit glued to that, learning the moves, learning what it takes to play the game, learning the maps. I played this game called EverQuest for years. Yeah. And there was I had books of stacks of maps and binders. And after a while, it's like I knew all of the stuff, and I could just run through the maps without actually having to pull up my maps. And so, that was hours and hours a day. So if you can find something that your kids are interested in, but is also pulling them to learn more, it's like, and they're playing video games because you're not actually stimulating them in other ways. So you find out what they're curious about, you find out what they like. Man, if they like music, wow, 3-4 hours a day wouldn't be enough. I know people who when they get into their guitars, they go into this internal zone of flow, and they can play all day long.
Yeah. And what you were saying about video games, there's actually a field of pedagogy called game-based pedagogy that looks at why do kids say they don't like school because they have to sit in an uncomfortable chair and do challenging things that are boring all day. But they'll sit in an uncomfortable chair and do challenging, boring things in a video game all day, that are often uncomfortable or boring, but they'll do repetitive things in a video game. And it has a lot to do with the reward system that was built into it. So there's some really cool studies coming out about that. That you would be interested in. But there was something else I wanted to say about that, because you were headed in a direction that I was like, yes, that. Well, maybe it'll come back to me later.
Was it about the cooking and the?
Was it about the gameplay and finding what they're interested in?
Oh yeah, gameplay. So within game-based game-based pedagogy, there are several books written about play and the value of play, the pedagogical use of play, and companies that hire students with 4.0 and lots of accomplishments and stuff, they found, especially engineering corporations, they find that the engineers don't know how to do anything. Even though they're book smart, they don't know how to do anything. And so they had to make an adjustment to find kids who did curiosity-based learning, who tinkered at home, who played, and who went down the rabbit hole when they were curious about something, because those are the kids who are innovative, creative, very good at problem solving. They're self-motivated. They know how to find resources to educate themselves when they need to. And that's back to that Howard Gardner definition of intelligence that I really appreciate. Like, not can you memorize things well, or not are you logically sound, but what does it look like? Can you demonstrate your intelligence?
Yeah.
And colleges right now are recruiting more from homeschooled kids or kids who are educated at home, because they do have the ability to pivot and move. They can't. Jordan Peterson talks about how in his psychology classes, how he gets college students in these high programs who don't know how to write a sentence and don't know how to do critical thinking. And as a college professor teaching like high level psychology, he's having to teach kids how to think and how to write sentences. And he's like, what's going on here? So doing that from home, finding what they're interested in, that also promotes reading, because, hey, you know what, here's a book on this and you can learn more from reading and then maybe get some ideas. So then that pulls the kids into books and reading and learning on their own and pulling information that they want to learn without having to get it from somebody else. They can get it on their own. But so it's just, so the colleges are heavily recruiting from people who are educated at home right now, just because they're more competent, and they understand kind of what they're doing and what they're going for.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I also think I feel like we're aligned on like all the points we're talking about, and I'm starting to think that you're the text and I'm the inline citations. You make a point and I'm like, you're right, let me tell you about all the literature behind what you're saying. So you say something and then I'm like, here's the parenthetical citation, where to find that research.
I love that. And that's actually part of the reason why we had this meeting, why we decided to bring you on to Bringing Education Home, is because it's like, we have our life experiences and we have our parenting experiences. And then we found this wonderful lady who actually has done a lot of research and has the doctorate and everything that, kind of helps us understand more and helps our parents and families who are listening understand that, we're not, and not just this crazy one-time thing from this person's experience. It's happening all over, and there's research behind it. And we might not, quote the research a lot, but it's out there, it's there. And, we have researched some and we have learned and we know, and now we have this wonderful lady, Nichole, who's helping fill in some of those gaps. And, it is just so amazing that, and actually that was the dichotomy I was just trying to think about. It's like, you're a university professor, right? And I was an elementary school teacher, and we're saying, get your kids out of the institutions or only go to the institutions if it's really what they need, right? Because, as education from home, we're telling parents, it's like, don't set your kid up to go to college unless that's really what they need or want, right? So help explain that a little bit. How did we go so far off the rails? No, just kidding.
That'd be a long
colleges. You want to hear where colleges went wrong?
Or why we're these people who were in these situations and now we're like branching away from them or helping people, let's do it different.
Yeah, so I'm like an out of the box thinker. If you want to go into that, I can take you down some rabbit holes, but we're not going to go there. So actually, I want to bring this back to your bio a little bit about your upcoming books. Teaching.
By the way, I could go down the rabbit hole too, but go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. That might be a whole nother podcast.
We'll do that on another one.
Talk about who controls the universities and what function they actually serve in society. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Teaching Kids Healthy Dissent is your upcoming book, focuses on creating new practices in home and schools to teach how to dissent. I'm in a coaching group called Being True to You. And one of the things that coaches do is we kind of get under problems and we try and give people tools to solve or to work around their issues. And one of the issues that kind of comes up, because we're doing a lot of psychospiritual work, is people talk about how as a child they weren't seen, they weren't heard, they were always told to be quiet. And so there's a lot of people dealing with feeling like they're not heard later in life because of stuff that happened as a child. So how does that relate to being able to healthy dissent in kids? How do we, because I can see it, I just can't quite put the pieces together there yet.
How it shows up later in life. Let's see. I think if we fundamentally change, and I think I mentioned this to you when we chatted before, that when in my research, I found that there were the two strongest normalizing institutions in any nation are the schools and the homes. And I was looking for, I teach critical thinking and I look at student resistance and, excuse me, the resistance of different languages and how languages change over time. And then I thought, well, when I had kids, I was like, all right, well, I definitely want to teach my kids healthy ways to express their disagreement with me so that they don't end up in some of these warped situations that I'm dealing with when I get resistant students. So I looked at all the parenting literature out there, and it was like books on the right were kind of more like how to get your kids to obey. And books on the left were how to be permissive or how to manipulate your kids with cognitive behavioral tricks. Yeah. But none of them were like, here's how to handle conflict. Here's how to welcome conflict and teach your kids a healthy way to respond in the moment. And if you think about it, having disagreements or having your own opinion is as healthy a stage of development as learning to walk. And if our kids were trying to walk and they messed up, learning to walk, that fell down, they broke something, we wouldn't be like, I'm going to buy a book and figure out how to make you never try to walk again. Instead, we would just give them like a safe environment to learn to walk in. But a lot of times when our kids disagree with us, we're like, I'm going to buy a book and teach you to never disagree with me again. So what I started looking at was how would we create a safe space for our children to learn how to disagree in a healthy way with age-appropriate decisions, and where the stakes aren't too high, the stakes are low. So it's okay to learn from their mistakes. And I started using the pedagogical model that I use in my classrooms and like applying that to parenting. And like I said, I couldn't find anything in the current parenting literature that it teaches a healthy way to teach dissent. And I believe how that would play out in adulthood is what we see, in the news and media now. Like we only know unhealthy dissent, which is like going to have a protest that leads unfortunately nowhere. I wish they did go some probably do. Or we're factioning. We have our separate news channels. We're sticking our thumbs at each other. We're calling each other names. And once we name someone something, we don't have to engage with their thoughts anymore. Or we go to war. We invent a new political party. So we have all these ways of never actually solving a problem. Or one party wins and then the next party wins, and and it's just back and forth. That's how I think it plays out in adulthood. Or we have all these and I've gone deep into understanding all the different ways people keep from ever problem solving. And we have so many strategies, spiritual bypass. Oh, I already forgive this person, so there's no reason to talk about the conflict. Or I'm sure they were coming from a good place, so we don't have to talk about it. or defense mechanisms, or, I'm just going to numb myself. So, here I'm going to go meditate. That's again, spirituality, or I'm going to play a video game, or I'm going to take this substance so I don't have to feel my pain about this conflict. And I believe that it's one of the reasons politically we're at the position we're at now. It's because from childhood on, we don't have a healthy way to express dissent. And if you think about, the most important moments in our country, most defining moments, a lot of them have been moments of dissent and expressing dissent in a really healthy way, and communicating it, finding a way to reach the audience. And then we work out a solution that works for most people, at least, or we find a way to take turns, if nothing else.
So that was beautiful. That
Yes.
was very, very wonderful. And also at the same time, kids do need structure. They do need boundaries. They
Yes.
do need to be kept alive, because kids are stupid little creatures and they will jump into danger and do crazy stuff. So there is times where it's like there shouldn't be dissent, and you do need to keep your children safe. So where is that age?
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah.
Kind of balance in that, because it's like
what I found on the left were the parenting books that were permissive, that were like, well, their blood sugar is low, that's why they were bad, and never actually. So they were just giving their kids permission and not providing boundaries or manipulating them. Just being like, I'm sorry, I'm going to really clear my throat this time. We have a lot of pollen going on right now. Or, I'm going to, I read an article that was like, instead of saying you do have to eat your vegetables tonight, instead you target another kid in the family and say, I love how you're eating your broccoli.
Right.
So I'm not a fan of those kind of things. Here's the guidelines for me are like, I think about, once again, to put it in the metaphor of kids learning to walk. Would I let my kid practice climbing at a funeral? No. Or like try out their legs, or practice something while we're in the middle of an important ceremony, or we're at a friend's house where there are a lot of things that could be broken. No, I wouldn't. I would just say, this is not a time. And that's how I deal with it with my children. I'll say, this isn't a time that I can negotiate with you. Right. So sometimes we're in an appropriate space and I'll allow it. And other times I'll say, this is not it. And and in that sense, some people come down on schooling, the skills and drills type of schooling versus the more like complex discussion based. And I say there's a place for both, because when we're crossing a street and my kids are toddlers, they need to understand my emergency voice, that when I yell at them, I'm not going to say, sweetie, mommy wants you to stay out of the street right now. I'm going to call their name. I'm going to get out of that street. Because that's a time that they need to know how to respond. They need to obey me. They need to trust me. Mm-hmm. But other times when it's not a place where it's dangerous, things can be broken, there can be harmful consequences, then I'll be like, I'll make a kind request, and there'll be space for negotiation. And I think I've mentioned this before. My kids are used to the phrase from me. If they disagree with me, I'll say, well, here's my reason that I don't want to take you to that thing. But if you can make a compelling case that it's going to be worth my time, I'm listening.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things. Oh God, I just lost it. Oh, when we were raising our boys, it was always, there's our rules in our house. And when we go to somebody else's house, out of respect and sometimes out of a way to keep you safe, there's rules in other people's houses. And that's how we interact. That's how we show respect and kindness and really grow up to know that. So kind of like what you were talking about, there's certain situations that's just not acceptable, and children need to know that. But again, you built the base, right? You've communicated this over time and you've worked with them over time. It's not like one day, oh, I'm going to change. I'm going to do it like this. So
when this was like a contention that we kind of had when in our marriage and with our kids, is I made a point of telling my kids, is like, if I ask you to do something, you have the ability to say no, because I'm asking. But if I tell you to do something, then And I made a very big distinction. So there were times where I asked them to do something and they said no, and I honored that, and then I just grumbled and did it myself. But there were times, because it's like there's times where it's like I want them to do that because I don't want to have to do that. Will you do? No. Okay, so I have to do it. But there are other times it's like, no, this isn't a time for discussion. This is what you need to do. And so I made a very big distinction between if I asked them to do something and if I told them to do something. And she was kind of the, oh, I asked them to do it, I expect them to do it. So that was, again, we figured that out over time. But that was one of the things that I was very in my heart that I held on to.
But in my household, asking was telling. That's the way I grew up. Mom and Dad might ask you to do it, but that really meant get up and get going.
Yeah, I can understand that. And I think kids need to kind of grow up being normalized to both methods, because they're going to come across teachers or bosses who ask, but they're not actually asking, and so that's one thing I like about being in the co-op. My kids are being exposed to different parenting styles. And, when they come home and they say, this different thing happened at, this person's house, I'll be like, oh, well, that's how they handle it. You get to decide what you're going to do with your kids. But I did the same thing, Herb. I would say, I would make a request if it really was an option. And if it wasn't an option, I would just say, it's time to. That was my distinction. It's time to brush your teeth. It's time to put on your pajamas.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Wow. This has been such a deep conversation and such a wonderful conversation. And we've gone all the way from, the schooling to the education at home and why it's a good mix, and maybe even it's time to make a change in your child's life. And this has been amazing. And I love this last part of the conversation that we've just had about that reasonable dissent. Is like, how do we teach our kids to, respectfully disagree, basically? How do we help make a point without blowing things up, calling names and all of that kind of stuff? And this is a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I think we'll have to have Nichole back.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, especially once the book comes out. Yeah, let's go deeper.
I heard this new saying, and something you were talking about, the books on the left versus the books on the right. And so a new saying that I kind of heard is, if you don't raise your children, you'll be raising your grandchildren. Or so raise your children or raise your grandchildren, right? So many people are just letting their kids they're not raising them, they're just letting them go, and then then so they're basically spoiling their children. So if you spoil your children, you're going to be raising your grandchildren. So that's a good point. And you can kind of see that happening a lot right now.
Yeah, and to put a parenthetical citation on that, studies show that if you're not ideologically explicit with your kids, if you don't really take charge of your beliefs and communicate those to your kids, and people are afraid to do that because they're like, well, I don't want to tell my kids what to believe. I don't want to program them. But society will not hesitate to program your kids for you. And so you have to step in and say, in this home, we believe blah, blah, blah. And your kids are welcome to depart from that at some point. But you say, in this home, this is what we do.
I love that, because it's kind of like my classroom. It's like, in my classroom, this is how we behave. The expectations of second graders right now are ... Yeah, exactly. So Nichole, if somebody wanted to reach out and have a little bit further discussion with you or find out more about your book, what's the best way to get a hold of you, just so they have a contact?
Well, right now, the best way to reach me is my email address, which is just my name, Nichole Stanford, and it's Nichole with an H, which is a little surprise in there. So NicholeStanford@gmail.com. And I'll be working on creating some kind of social media presence and it's in some format, but I have that, and I'm looking at getting some videos up about some of the parenting stuff that I'm doing right now.
Awesome. And when you do, we can always add those to the show notes later as well. So even though it might not be there right now, in the future, when people find this discussion, they'll be able to go ahead and jump in there and look at those as well. So families, friends, vibrant families, we want people to grow and continue to grow and be with their families. Thank you for staying with us for this wonderful conversation, Nichole. It was a blessing to have you with us here today. And as always, find those nuggets, find those special things that we talked about today that might be able to make that change in your life and your family so that we have happy, healthy, and successful kids. Thanks everybody for being with us today.
Thank you, Nichole. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you here, and we look forward to having you back in the future.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. And thank you so much for sharing your heart and your experiences with me.
You're welcome. All right, everybody. Bye for now.